Welcome back into the Red Zone podcast. My name is Colten Bartholomew, UW football beat reporter here for the Wisconsin State Journal. I am joined by longtime football and basketball beat reporter Jim Polzin, who is now our columnist at Lee Sports Wisconsin. And Jim, it is game week. I'm saying it again. It's game week. We have made it here. We've been talking about this game and this team by itself for far too long. We're actually going to talk about a game. I'm excited.
Yeah, I can't wait to get some actual game material to write about and to get a better understanding of this team and all these teams, because it's been a long off season, and it's been really a long 2 seasons with no fans in the stands. So I'm really eager to get back in the stadium on Saturday.
Yeah, same here. And it's football season, or football off season, is always 9 months. I understand that, but this felt, with everything going on and with the way that the world has been the last 9 months, it's felt like a lot longer than that. So it's been something. I think there's going to be a different level of buzz and, atmosphere. We'll get into it in a little bit, but I think there's just going to be a energy that we haven't seen before at Camp Randall this week, not only because it's a huge game to start the season, but then adding where the world's been the last 2 years without fans in the stands. It's going to be something.
I think that there's a lot of pent up energy among the fans. I'm a little nervous that there's going to be a grumpy fan base if they are not getting in the stadium efficiently on Saturday. We know we've heard the warnings. So if you haven't already, just let us tell you, get there early. There's going to be long lines. They're going to a ticketless system. Basically, you're using your phone for a lot of you, and there's just less. There are fewer workers. They're having a hard time hiring workers. So they recommended get there. If you're normally the type that gets there 10:45, push that up to 10:15, and really probably add an extra half hour, just so you're in your seats at kickoff, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, no, that's a great thing to put out there right now. So give you guys a quick rundown of the show. We're going to briefly talk about the Loyal Crawford situation. You guys might have seen the news about him and freshman running back Antoine Roberts this week. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Then we're going to preview the game, talk about how the defense might be able to slow down this new look Penn State offense, and then what we might see from the Badgers offense this week, because they made some changes as well. And I think it's going to be, significantly different than what we saw last year. And then we're going to do our Big Ten picks, a pretty full slate with everybody playing non-conference games outside of a couple instances. So lots of games to talk about there. But instead of going to an ad right now, we're going to talk about this Loyal Crawford situation, Jim. If you guys haven't read the story on madison.com, go and check that out. Gives you a little more details than I'm about to right now. But just what we can tell you and what we know right now, freshman running backs Loyal Crawford and Antoine Roberts got into a fight in Residence Hall. At some point in that fight, Loyal Crawford picked up a knife. There were no injuries related to the knife, and there was only minor, bumps and bruises that came out of said fight. Loyal Crawford was dismissed from the team this week, and Antoine Roberts is suspended indefinitely. I've reached out to both players trying to get their sides of the stories, and I'm not surprised we haven't heard back from them, Jim, but I always feel like it's fair when stuff like this happens to try to give them a chance to have their voice out there and make sure that they have a platform to say, this happened, their kind of take on the situation. There's a lot that's going to happen before all this is resolved, and it's not going to be, I think, as quickly answered and a done deal as some people would like. But I think your overall assessment of this would be, this isn't good. Obviously not a good thing when you've got teammates fighting, and particularly these guys, both of them had some high hopes about what they could do when they came here, especially with Loyal Crawford being an in-state guy. So just a tough look, and not something you want to see on a game week or any week, but especially right before your first game.
Yeah, I mean, that was the one thing that stood out, is just the timing of it all. It's you want no distractions heading into your first game, and obviously that's not the case. And this has been going on. We only found out about it yesterday, but I'm sure the team's known about it for over a week now, players included. So it's probably not as big of a distraction to them as it may seem from the outside. But yeah, not good. I mean, and pretty rare, I will say, for this program. I mean, this is not a program that you have stuff like this happen very often. So it is eye-opening when something like it does happen. And certainly want to wait until all the facts are out and everybody's had their say. But yeah, not a great situation. I mean, it's a unique setup with the recruiting class this year in that they brought in 3 tailbacks and then added Braylon Allen to that mix. He wasn't initially a tailback. So there's 4 true freshman running backs.
Yeah, and then you throw in Ches Malusi coming in as a transfer in that room too.
Yeah, it was so I hate to say this, you can afford a spot, you can afford to lose a player there, but for Loyal Crawford's, it's not great for him, obviously, and it's an in-state kid. It's an in-state kid that doesn't even get a chance to play here. So like you said, not a good situation all the way around, and hopefully things will get sorted out where there's, no questions or no, 2 sides at the end of this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I said before, Jim, this is going to be something that we're reporting on and covering for a little while here. So I know in situations like these, people want to rush to judgment and say things, X, Y, or Z about each guy. I would advise anybody that's listening to pump the brakes, wait till we know what happened and what was going on, because Loyal Crawford has come out and said that Antoine Roberts, his version of the story is that Antoine Roberts attacked him in the dorm room where they were. We haven't heard anything from Antoine Roberts. So yeah, this is going to take a while for all the facts to come out. So I would just say wait till that happens, until we kind of are, not that making judgments ever a good thing, I guess, but just kind of wait to make your analysis of it until we know quite what happened. But that's about all we can say about it right now. And since there's really no easy transition to talk from that to football games, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back after this. All right, Jim, we are back and we're going to break down this Penn State game. Huge game where you've got number 19 Penn State coming to number 12. Wisconsin's going to kick off at 11 a.m. on Saturday. If you're not coming to Camp Randall, you can catch it on Fox. And I want to start with the defense here, Jim, because I think this is going to be a fascinating matchup. And I know I've mentioned it a few times on the podcast during training camp, but to start off your year with this defense going against a team like Penn State that's got Jahan Dotson, one of the most, kind of heralded running or wide receivers coming back in the Big Ten this year, Parker Washington, who came in as a true freshman last season and really made some big catches, impact plays. To me, those guys going against this secondary is the matchup of the game. Whichever unit of those two wins their matchups, I think that team wins the game.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've talked about this before. There's so much experience in that UW secondary, but there have been times over the years where they've not looked great against teams with a lot of weapons, and Penn State certainly qualifies. I mean, Jahan Dotson's one of the best. I think in most years he'd be the best receiver in the Big Ten.
Yeah, so
right. That group is loaded this year with a couple guys at Ohio State and others too. There's probably 5 or 6 really legit top end wide receivers. So yeah, I'm interested. I mean, and then which Sean Clifford do we see? I think he had 8 interceptions in the first 5 games last year, which Penn State lost all those games. He only had 1 in the final 4 games. Penn State won all those games. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think he did a better job of taking care of the ball. New offensive coordinator this year, Mike Yursich, who was at Texas last year. Texas averaged over 42 points a game. They're number 7 nationally in scoring offense. So it's going to be a little bit different look than I think we've seen over the years from Penn State. But, Yursich walks into a situation that he's got a lot of weapons at his disposal. And it'll be interesting to see how that matchup between, Yursich and Jim Leonhard plays out.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see because, we know Penn State throughout the years has been a tight end factory, right? Like how many guys have they sent to the NFL in the last 20 years? But in Yursich's kind of progression through the college and coaching ranks, he hasn't really utilized tight ends all that much. Like you go back and look through how the targets are distributed and how they kind of use their tight ends. It's not like Penn State of old where you can depend on that tight end getting 5 to 8 to 10 targets a game. So that's going to be different. And I think that just adds to that matchup between the wide receivers and the secondary. And you mentioned Sean Clifford, the Penn State quarterback. My biggest question, I think, going in outside of, how do they handle those wide receivers is how do how do the safeties in the front seven help the cornerbacks in that matchup? Because some defensive coordinators would say, okay, we've got to blanket both those guys with a safety, and then we'll give up the middle of the field and trust our linebackers to cover in space. Or some would say, let's just go after Clifford with the front guys, not give him any time. I just think that kind of mixture, how Jim Leonhard kind of balances those two methods out, because I don't think he's going to do one thing all game. Like we've seen Jim Leonhard, he mixes it up throughout a game really well. And that's why the NFL has been kind of courting him the last few years, the way that he, adjusts mid-game and does different stuff. And I think that balance that he strikes between how much they attack Clifford with blitzes, getting the linebackers involved, versus really kind of blanket the coverage around the field and not give him any space to throw is just going to be a fascinating X's and O's old school football thing.
One thing that stood out the other day when Jim Leonhard was talking to us is that, he said Sean Clifford is a guy that likes to get hit. He likes to run the ball. He looks like a guy that likes to take hits. That said, I think Wisconsin's got to get some good licks in on him. They've got to hit him and send a message early in this game, and maybe decrease that element of his game to some degree, make him a little bit more one-dimensional. I think that'll bode well. The other thing I want to touch on, like you talked to Feon Hicks the other day and wrote a really interesting story. Tell our listeners about that, because that I think was a little bit uncharacteristic. When he said that, were you surprised?
I was stunned. So make sure you go out and check it on madison.com. Wrote about this matchup between the secondary and these receivers. But Feon Hicks, who, figures to follow one of these guys around a lot. He's the Badgers' primary slot defender, which means, he'd be on Parker Washington a bunch, but he's also probably their number one outside corner too. So that means he'd be on Jahan Dotson a bunch. So I kind of asked him, do you want to follow one of them around, or how do you want to handle it? And he just kind of pretty flatly said, I'm going to follow 5, which is Jahan Dotson's number. And he said, we're going to see how good he is, because Jahan Dotson has been saying for a couple of months now, he said at Big Ten Media Days, and he said it a few other times in some national interviews, he feels like he's the best receiver in college football. So I'm fascinated to see that matchup. It's very rare for any Badger player to kind of tip their hand schematically or strategy-wise what either side of the ball is going to do. So I don't know for a fact if Feon Hicks is going to be following Jahan Dotson all over the field. But I will say in Mike Yurcich's defense or offenses throughout his coaching career, he's put his number one receiver all over the formation. He hasn't just put him on the short side or the wide side and said, win your battle. He has put them in good spots. So if I'm Jim Leonhard, putting Feon Hicks wherever he goes would make some sense, and then kind of working around that because of how much trust they have in Feon Hicks and how good Jahan Dotson is.
Another thing, we always tend to focus on starters, right? Like Hicks and Caesar Williams have played a lot of football here. Interesting to me that they listed 6 guys in the 2 deep this week at corner. And, some of that it makes sense. They're going to spend a lot of time in the nickel. Jim Leonhard says they spent over 50% of their snaps the last couple of years in that. And I think that'll play out on Saturday against that offense. So we're going to see Dean Engram. We're going to see probably at some point, we're going to see all 4 of those guys, right? Alexander Smith,
yep.
Samar Melvin, Dante Burton. But it was interesting to me that they listed all those guys. And I think Jim Leonhard, that was kind of his way of saying that he's seen good things from all of them, which we've been hearing for a couple of years. There's probably no separation between 3 and 6, no big separation at least. So, that'll be it'll be interesting how those snaps are divvied up on Saturday.
Yeah. And to that point, I was talking to Feon Hicks about that the week prior when we spoke to some players, and he said that he's never seen a battle throughout camp like he saw between Dean Engram and Alex Smith, and that competition throughout an entire camp and neither one really being able to pull away. Like if you're a pessimist, you'd say, oh, that's not good. Nobody was able to step up. But then if you're an optimist, you say both the guys played well enough that there wasn't a separation and they both earned reps. So I think that's going to be, we've heard multiple guys say this is the deepest that the secondary's ever been, and it's going to be put to the test right away because Penn State's going to put 4 and 5 wide receivers on the field, I think, in this offense quite often. So it's going to be interesting to see how they match up as a defense. I think at times Leonhard has said, I'd rather have some pass rushers on the field and not give up some of those spots for corners that are just in coverage. He might have to adjust that, not only because he trusts his corners, but because of the matchups that are going to be out there from Penn State.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've kind of been talking about the pass rush and how it needs to be better this year. And I think it's easy to focus on the outside linebackers, but that's really going to have to be a group effort. The defensive linemen, which again, I feel like we've said a million times, those guys I think are going to have to put up better sack and pressure numbers this year. The two inside guys, Jack Sanborn and Leo Chanel, certainly are going to have to get to the quarterback a lot. So it's going to have to be a team effort from that front seven. And if they can do that and make Clifford a little bit uncomfortable, I do think that bodes well for their ability to keep the score down, which frankly they might have to do.
Yeah, and you can't let, like I've said multiple times, I'm not a big Sean Clifford guy. I think he's fine. I don't think he's really a next level type of quarterback. But you give any quarterback with these types of receivers time, he's going to carve you up. Like, they're going to get open eventually. So yeah, they've got to get pressure. The one thing that's kind of odd when you look at this Penn State roster, Jim, is that they don't have a running back that scares you. And when's the last time you really said that about Penn State? Like, I know they had a different situation with Journey Brown. He was supposed to be that next guy kind of bridging the gap here. That didn't work out for him. But I'm just surprised that they weren't as aggressive trying to go get somebody in the transfer portal or, trying to address that, because they're coming into this game with a couple of running backs that, frankly, I don't think really strikes fear into any defense. And to me, you bring in a coordinator like Yursich, you're already kind of admitting we're going to throw the ball a ton. And then you've got a couple of running backs back there that aren't, top tier guys. They've been super aggressive in recruiting. If you guys have been paying attention to that, they've landed 2 4-star, like high 4-star, probably going to end up being at least one of them going to be a 5-star by the time they come to campus, running backs for the 2022 class. So I think they've kind of said, like, this is this group's last year and we're going to be kind of transitioning forward. But I think that bodes well for this Wisconsin defense, because I think getting them one-dimensional is not going to be as big a challenge as it might be in past years.
Yeah, I remember reading in the spring, and there was hope that they had a group of guys, and they were hoping that one or two of them would emerge. I mean, they showed a lot of promise, and I think that there was kind of this feeling that somebody would jump to the forefront, and I don't know if that's happened. Or the flip side of this is Penn State's done a good job of keeping information out too. I mean, that's the one thing. That's one of that program is probably better at most than. I don't think they let reporters into practice. If they do, it's not very often. They don't put out a depth chart, so they keep information to a minimum. So you do kind of go in this a little bit unknown. But yeah, my feeling is that they have not seen the progress from the tailback position that they had hoped to see, 3-4 months ago.
Yeah, I agree. One last point on this offense and / what you just said, not putting out a depth chart is one of the lamest moves in college football, and I hate it. And when the NCAA and some of these conferences start signing betting agreements, because that's going to happen eventually, that's going to change, and I'm ready for it.
Yeah, I just, it's stupid, and I wish the conference would do something about it. I mean, just so everybody's on level playing field, because, Wisconsin, to its credit, is one of the teams that does put out a depth chart, and it's very helpful. This week it was very helpful to know that Ches Malusi is going to be the starter at tailback, right? I don't know how much Paul Chryst cares that James Franklin and his staff know that. Obviously, not very little. But then for Penn State not to have to do the same thing, it's silly.
Yeah.
One of the things about the NFL, and you can fudge the injury report, obviously, but there is a injury report that's required. So at least all teams are, in theory, on a level playing field. That's not the case in college.
Yeah, that is unfortunate. It just annoys me as not only somebody who covers this stuff, but just if you're a fan, like, not knowing the quote unquote winners of battles, like, I don't know, I think it just does a disservice on a lot of ends to not put out a depth chart. But let's jump over to the offense here for the Badgers, because Jim, you and I talked about a couple of weeks ago on the podcast that we were worried about this offense. Frankly, it was really lagging behind where the defense was at, and it wasn't looking good in camp. I feel like over the last week, it kind of picked it up, and we started seeing guys like Kendrick Pryor and Jim DK making some plays. They should be healthy. Tyler Beach is on track to start. Danny Davis is going to be out there, receiver. What are some reasonable expectations you think in this first week, given who they're playing, what they look like, and where you think they're at as an offense?
Well, I mean, I say this knowing that my final score prediction had Wisconsin with 17 points, so that's not a real optimistic view, is it? I still think they're going to struggle. I see the potential for that group. I mean, I just think there's so much unknown to me still, despite us getting to watch part of camp. One of the unknowns is, can Graham Mertz take a step and do it consistently, right? We saw progress in camp, but can he do it in games and do it week to week to week? Is the offensive line going to be good and a strength this year? Because again, that group was shuffled around so much during camp that I don't know how much of a rhythm and a consistency that group was able to develop. So I do head into the opener with a little bit of question mark there. And then finally, I wrote this, but there's so much we don't know about Chez Mellusi, and I'm curious to see how it all plays out. Is he a 20 carry a game guy? We haven't seen that yet from him in his career. How much explosiveness can he add to the offense? Are there enough playmakers around him and Graham Mertz? We've seen some good flashes out of Kendrick Pryor and Chimere Dike and Danny Davis. Is there a true game breaker in that group? I don't know. You kind of know what you're going to get from Jake Ferguson at tight end, but I do wonder about the lack of star power on this offense. And if that kind of puts them in a position where they just have to grind out these long drives over and over, where your margin for error is so thin and things can go wrong, a penalty here, a turnover there, settling for a field goal instead of scoring touchdowns, all that stuff, it just makes it so much harder. And I wonder how well it'll be able to grind.
No, that's a great point, or a lot of the great points in there. And I actually just wrote a story today. You guys can check out madison.com about this offense knowing that they need to be more explosive. And Chez Mellusi actually said one of the things that Gary Brown, the new running backs coach, has said was take the shackles off your game. Like that's been a constant theme for them is, don't think like we have to, grind out 4 and 5 yard runs. Like they definitely seem to all have the mindset, at least, like make plays happen, try to go for things, like kind of play loose. And I think over the years when they haven't had that star power, like you mentioned, like a Jonathan Taylor in the backfield, those gap years in between some of those top running backs we all remember, it's been up to guys to step into those roles and to make things happen. And even some, past examples, like let's say like a Taiwan Deal or guys that came into some spot situations, play well in your role like that, make some things happen. 5-6 yard runs are good runs, things of that nature. And then it opens other things up. And that's, to me, the biggest thing for this Penn State game is I think this Penn State defensive line is kind of vulnerable. They've got 3 new starters. 2 of them are transfers from lower schools. Like I think one's from Temple and another one's from Duke, if I remember correctly. Probably should have wrote that down in the notes, but whatever.
You're right. You nailed it.
Oh, I did? Okay, good. Neither one to me, I mean, I know they had some pretty good numbers where they're at, but neither one to me it's like a game record type of guy. If you're guys like Joe Tippmann, who's, been playing some of his best football in college the last month, Jack Nelson, who we've talked many times about, like that interior of the line, I think is really going to be, it's up to them to create holes, get things going in the running game, at least to a point that sets up the passing game and sets up the play action. Because one of the things that we saw throughout camp and when this offense looked at its best was off of play action with Graham Mertz on the move. And I think that's one of the things that's a little bit underrated about Graham Mertz's game. He's not going to be running around making a ton of plays with his feet, but he can throw well and accurately on the move. And that's something that I think they're going to use quite a bit this year, so long as the running game can, be good enough that it gets defenses to bite on those things and open things up when they use the play action. So I think all of your points concerns are fair. And I think that's where this offensive line really has to take a step forward. Graham Mertz, I mean, he's a quarterback talking about his offensive line. It's always going to be positive, but he did say like this group's huge and they're all maulers. Like they've seen a lot more physicality than they have in the last couple of years. I think that overall athleticism of this offensive line is better than it was the last 2 years. So I think this is going to be a big test right out of the gate, but it's one I think this offensive line should win if they're going to get to the heights we think they can this year.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up a point I was going to bring up because I was there when Mertz was talking about Jack Nelson. I think he was asked a question about Jack Nelson and then a follow-up on Joe Tippmann, and he said both those guys are maulers, and he said basically this whole offensive line is maulers, and that's good to hear. I mean, I think this program is at its best when it's got an offensive line that can just grind you down and, You can count on 200 to 225 rushing yards a game. You can count on having the ball 35 to 37 minutes and lightening the load on your defense and wearing the other team's defense down. So I understand the optimism on his part, and certainly he would know better than me after having been at every practice this fall. But I need to see it. I need to see it first, and I need to see it consistently. And like you said, it's going to be a good test. You're going against another Big Ten team. Like you said, it's kind of a defensive line in flux over there in State College, but still, these are Big Ten scholarship players. It's going to be a good measuring stick for this running game and how good it could be.
For sure. And one thing on Mertz, I think that this secondary for Penn State, I don't know if they have the star power that the last couple of years of Penn State defensive backs have had. But I think that that's a solid unit, all around. Both corners, I think, are pretty good. And then the safeties not only have been making plays in the box in the last year or two, but are pretty good at tracking balls down the field. So it's going to be a lot on Mertz of being accurate and getting the ball out on time, because what we saw last year, that hesitancy and trying to be perfect and trying to make sure guys are like, quote unquote, wide open, that doesn't work. And I think Graham Mertz has been pretty fair and honest about his maturation process and kind of understanding those things. And he's going to have to put it on display. Like, that's probably, if I'm a Paul Chryst or if I'm a coach on either side of this game, that's the one thing that I like about starting with a huge matchup like this in the Big Ten is, right away, like, if guys truly put in the work and where you still have room to grow throughout the year. Because if you come out and the same issues are there for the Wisconsin offense, it's like, man, what have we been talking about for 9 months? It'd be pretty disappointing if we didn't see some improvements from that unit.
Yeah, and you talk about the fans being back in the stands. I mean, it's like I said, if this offense doesn't get off to a fast start, or at least a decent start, there's going to be groaning and moaning because of the way things played out last year. So, I think it's important those first couple series for Graham Mertz to, be on point, get him comfortable and get him going in the passing game, get him some, quote unquote, easy throws. And I think it's important to get Malusi in a rhythm early. And I don't know how the carries are going to be distributed. I mean, I'm curious to see if he gets 20 carries, if it is kind of a 1-2 split evenly, and it's just Malusi's the starter. All that stuff's going to be fascinating to me.
Yeah, and one thing that I think that needs to be a significant part of this game plan for the Badgers, Penn State's always been linebacker U, right? That's one of their identities. That's one of the things they kind of hang their hat on. A lot of the guys that they're going to have playing in the rotation this year haven't played much. I think some of them got some minutes or some snaps last year after Micah Parsons sat out, and some of them are changing positions from inside to outside. And I know one of their guys is going from outside to inside. To me, I'm making these guys prove it, not only attacking the edge, which they seem to always do, running off tackle and their outside zone stuff. That's kind of a basis of this offense. But I think running some of those wheel routes, some of those backs out of the backfield routes, getting the tight ends on those guys with different formations and different motion, like, make these guys play to what they think they are. Because I think they've got solid recruiting reputations and all that type of stuff, but we haven't seen these Penn State linebackers that are going to play Saturday prove it on the field yet. And to me, that would be an area I attack. And it's not one that you're always typically going to go after against a Penn State team. But to me this year, like, you haven't seen it yet. You got to make these guys prove that they're good, because I think there are some plays to be made, especially with the backside of the backfield with Malusi and Berger with their speed, just because I think that there's an opportunity there to get some chunk plays, get some explosive plays that the Badgers really just haven't had the last, you could argue, 4 years with the inefficiency that Jonathan Taylor was as a receiver back then.
Yeah, and also worth reminding people that Paul Chryst is back to calling plays, right?
Yes.
I don't know how much different it'll look, but I'm curious to see what he's kind of got up his sleeve in terms of, different things. I do hope this offense gets a little bit more creative, and I think that would, some of this big play stuff you're talking about, I think that would help out. So I'm curious how much. I don't think it's going to be, it's not going to be household changes, obviously, right? But I hope there's some wrinkles that maybe we haven't seen.
Yeah, for sure. All right. And you mentioned one of the X factors I want to talk about, which is the crowd, like good and bad, because I'm with you. If the offense is going out there 3 punts in a row or something, I think you are going to hear some boo birds. But I think having the crowd's going to help the defense a bunch. It's going to have some challenges where they're not going to be able to communicate as well, but I think it's going to affect some things Penn State wants to do. But the other one to me is Colin Larsh being the starting kicker. It's a little surprising because of what we saw in camp, just the extended range that Jack Van Dyke gives you as a kicker. He was hurt the last couple of weeks that we got to see as reporters. So I think that was certainly a factor, just he wasn't available for a lot of camp. But both of you and I have this as a one-score game, and you got to make kicks in a one-score game, and you've got to be able to at least threaten to score inside the 40. You can't have to be inside the red zone or inside the 10 to be a for sure kicker, to be a for sure field goal kicker. And to me, that's I need to see it from Colin Larsh because we haven't in 2 years, right? Like, I'm not trying to belittle the kid. It's just he hasn't been a clutch guy in his career thus far, and maybe that's changed and we just haven't seen it on the practice field the times we were there. But man, to me, on paper, limiting yourself to the shorter kicks that we've seen in his career thus far is a big surprise.
Yeah, and that's another reason why I'm a little bit reluctant to, predict a really, really big season for this team. I just think their ceiling only reaches a certain point because you need to have really good special teams. The best teams here have had really, really good special teams, and especially kickers they could count on. And I agree with you. I don't know that we can say that yet about Colin Larsh. I'm not totally sure we could say that about Jack Van Dyke yet, right? I mean, he had won the job from what we had seen in camp, but there's a big difference between doing that and making big kicks in games. So whoever lines up, whoever won that job, I was going to be a little bit, skeptical of them doing a consistent job. So I agree with you. It's a little bit disconcerting sending a guy out there and not knowing if you can count on him or not. And I agree. We haven't seen consistently enough, especially beyond 30, 35 yards from Larsh, to know that you can count on him.
Yeah. In the same vein, Penn State's had their own kicker issues, so maybe it ends up canceling out this one, but it's certainly something to watch for on the Badger side. Let's jump into our picks now. We have a lot of them that are the same, so we're going to, hammer through the ones that are going to be on the same side of. You won week 0, 1-0, because Nebraska. When is that going to be a thing? You know how it used to be Clemsoning? Like, can we make Nebraska a thing? Because they think they gave away 16 points and lost by 7. Like, that's not a good ratio. And then Scott Frost is out here talking about having to throw away half his game plan because of an odd front when he thought it was going to be even. Like, yikes, guy.
That was one of the most bizarre things I've ever heard. Like, I don't doubt. Okay, I think that stuff probably happens more than we know. But the team adjusts to it, and it never becomes a factor. Or B, the coach never admits to it. Like, that was the thing. Like, I can't believe he was so open about it. That stunned me.
Yeah, same. And let's start on the Nebraska game this week because they play a stupid game. They have Fordham at home. And you and I talked about it in the office yesterday, Jim. Nebraska had to have a couple of their donors throw in God knows how much money to buy 3,000 tickets that were set aside for Fordham that they couldn't sell because Fordham's not a football school. And more importantly, you're not going from the Bronx to Nebraska to watch your team get killed. So there's that. And then Nebraska is a 41.5-point favorite. And I had to go through 3 different, proprietors, let's say, 3 different boards to find this because so many people don't have it on there because it's such a dumb buy game. All that being said, both of us are on Fordham because I don't trust Nebraska to be able to put up 42 points without giving away some.
That's the thing. Like, I just feel like there's going to be a mistake or two in there that gives Fordham some points, and I just don't know if this Nebraska offense is explosive enough. Now, the flip side of this is that they might be so eager to prove a point after last week that they just have a feel-good game and put a lot of points on the board. But I don't know. That was a big number for me, and I would stay away from it.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I am just going to put it out there now. After what they did last week and make me look dumb, I'm not going on Nebraska unless they're getting like 15 to 16 points this year. I'm so mad at them for making me look dumb. I was so for this is Scott Frost redemption tour train week 1, and then to do that, screw you guys. There you go.
Hey, that might be on you, pal.
Well, that's fair too. I don't know. I'm interested to see what happens the rest of the year, because it costs Nebraska just about as much money to fire him as it does to keep him. But I don't know what you do at a certain point if he can't make it work. But that's a discussion for another day and other podcasts. I'm sure there's 75 Nebraska podcasts out there that the sky's falling on. All right, let's jump to a game that you guys are actually going to be able to watch tonight, which is Temple at Rutgers. Got a Thursday night special here. Rutgers is a 14.5-point favorite at home. Both of us are on Rutgers. Temple's not going to be very good this year, and I think Schiano's one of those coaches that he's going to make sure his team's feeling good in a week 1 bye game like that.
And I really like the direction Rutgers is heading, and I think they are. I mean, I even look ahead to that Wisconsin game out there. That's not going to be easy. There was a time where you could mark that down as a guaranteed win. He's a really good coach. He knows that program, knows that area. I think I don't know that he's going to get them back to Big Ten contender, but I think he's going to get them back to relevance. And I think he's well on his way to doing that.
I'm with you. And I think the number one thing he brings is physicality. You look at the way they played defense last year, they grinded games out. I mean, it was against some of the lower teams in the conference, but they're finally matching that physicality you've got to have in the Big Ten. And that's a huge first step. And that's a big challenge to do at a program like Rutgers. So we're both on them. And then Friday night, one of the interesting games here in the Big Ten is Ohio State going to Minnesota for the season openers for both those teams. Ohio State is laying 14 points, and we are actually both on Minnesota. And I don't know about you, Jim. To me, this wasn't as much of a I like Minnesota type of pick as much as it was 14 is a lot, especially when Ohio State is starting a freshman quarterback. And I think there's just so much change for the Buckeyes. I think starting a little slow would be fair to, expect coming from them.
Yeah, that's the same here. I really, it's not that I'm on any sort of Minnesota bandwagon in any way. I just think that CJ Stroud's debut comes on the road. I think, as was the case here, I think fans are going to be eager. I add more value to the home field advantage early this season because I do think fans are going to be a little bit louder. Players are going to be a little bit more nervous on the road. So I think they're going to keep this close enough. I think Ohio State's never going to be in jeopardy of losing this game. But yeah. I think, I think they're not going to get they're not going to win by 2 touchdowns either.
I'm with you. And I think also with Mo Ibrahim, I know Ohio State's going to have a really good defense, especially up front, but Mo Ibrahim can run the ball. Minnesota's got some monsters up front on that offensive line that are back this year. And I think they'll be able to do a little bit of a Wisconsin where you control the clock and you don't let the game get away from you. Even if you're losing, the game doesn't get away from you there. So we're both on Minnesota plus the 14. Michigan State is going to Northwestern in another Big Ten matchup this week. We are both on Northwestern. I'm trying to figure that line out, Jim, because I know that Northwestern lost quite a bit defensively, and it's a new starter at quarterback for them. But Michigan State seems so far away from what Northwestern has talent-wise. I just 3 didn't seem like enough, especially at home.
Yeah, it's weird. So Graham Couch covers Michigan State for one of the papers in Michigan, and I jumped into his 3 things to watch in his prediction. He's actually picking Michigan State to win. He just thinks they're better at quarterback and a lot of the skill positions, and he thinks that's going to be a big difference at a place that's not known as one of the most difficult places to play. But I don't know. I agree with you. I think Michigan State's at least a year away from being a super competitive, and asking them to go on the road and win, even for a program in a little bit of a transition, is difficult. It's still a really well coached team with some pretty high end players still remaining on that roster at Northwestern. It does come down to Hunter Johnson to some degree. All we've ever seen of him is being terrible. So for Northwestern's sake, he really has to improve this year, and maybe that's the reason why you pick against them. But I still like the home team here.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, jumping into Western Michigan, going to Michigan. Michigan is a 17-point favorite. We're both on Michigan. That's just one of those, you have to win that game by a bunch if you're Michigan. I know they've got a new starter as well. Oh, I guess not entirely new. He was there last year in Cade McNamara, and he started toward the end of the year. But you just can't. That game can't be close if you're the Wolverines. That's just what it comes down to in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, you talked a lot before about Scott Frost, and it's time for that program, and you start believing in that program. It's the same thing a little bit with Jim Harbaugh. Is like, when is that program going to reach its potential? And he's running out of time. He really is. And so, they need to make a big opening statement, and I think they will.
Yeah, it's funny when you compare those two, because if you're at Nebraska and you are doing what Jim Harbaugh does, winning 8, 9, 10 games actually a few times, knocking on the doorstep of the playoff that one time as well for Harbaugh and Michigan, I think Nebraska fans would be tripping over themselves to put more cash in Scott Frost's hands. But, that's just because the difference in expectations, I guess.
Yeah, and it's funny how that's changed, because they had that type of guy in Bo Pelini, right? I mean, they've, and it wasn't good enough. They thought they could do better. And it's gone the other way, and it's not looking good.
Yep. All right, let's jump into the Indiana and Iowa game, another ranked versus ranked matchup here in the Big Ten this week. We are on different sides of this one. I am going with Indiana, and then Jim is on Iowa with the 3.5. Honestly, if this was 3, I probably would have gone Iowa, because I just think that hook is a tough one, because I think Iowa's got the better kicker, and I think this is going to be a late game field goal win where Iowa City then proceeds to burn down afterward in the celebration. So I think this is going to be a tight game, but 3.5 just seemed like a little bit too much when you got Penix coming back and the offense that Indiana could have this year.
Yeah, I'm contradicting myself a little bit. Like we talked about this off air over text, but some guy asked me to do my power rankings on the Open Gym mailbag this week, and I put Indiana number 2 in the Big Ten just because I think they have a lot of high-end players, and you were surprised by that. And I guess it's fair. I think Indiana, Wisconsin, and Penn State, you can kind of flip those around, and they're largely same talent level, and whatever day they play, you never know. But I think it's going to be a tough first test for Indiana on the road. I just think, again, like, I'm probably putting too much value in home field, but I do think it's going to be a tremendous advantage early this season. And I like Iowa to win that game close, but by more than 3.5.
I think that's all fair. West Virginia is going to Maryland. West Virginia is a 2.5-point favorite on the road here. We're on different sides. I'll take West Virginia minus the points, and you're going to take Maryland. I think I'm going to guess your rationale for Maryland is you like Tagovailoa and that offense. I think West Virginia is going to have a pretty solid offense as well this year. I just feel like they can win by a field goal. I'm just not sold on Maryland's defense at all this year.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if I think Maryland's going to win this game, but it's going to be high scoring, and I am totally basing that on Tagovailoa and some of the I can't even say it, and some of the weapons he has around him. I do think this Maryland offense can be scary, can put up some points. So I think they're going to have to win this game, like 38-35 or something like that.
That's fair. All right, Oregon State is going to Purdue. Purdue is a 7-point favorite, and I think Oregon State's not going to be very good in the Pac-12 this year. Just 7 for Purdue seems like a lot when you've got a new starter, a quarterback, and I don't love their weapons. I know they got the running back Horvath. I don't know. I just thought 7 was a lot. I think Purdue very well could win this by a touchdown, but I'd still rather have the points in a matchup like that.
Yeah, I just don't trust Purdue yet. I just think, especially I worry about them in the trenches. Like they do, like you said, they've got some playmakers. David Bell is a really good wide receiver. So they've got some guys, but Karlaitis on defense. So they've got some really high-end players, but I do worry, like the offensive line. I worry about the quarterback position. It's tough to see them, it's tough to see them winning a double-digit game early in the season.
One more that's not the Wisconsin game. We got the UTSA Roadrunners going to Illinois. That's Texas, San Antonio, if you didn't know. But they are getting 5.5 points at Illinois, and we are both on UTSA. And I think we are both on the same mindset because I read Open Gym this week that this is a letdown a little bit where Illinois had that big emotional win to start the Bielema era. They're still on a backup quarterback. I like their offensive line. I think they played well once they finally got in the flow of the game, but the rest of the team wasn't all too sold against Nebraska.
Yeah, I mean, Nebraska did so much in that game to give the game away. That's why, I don't want to take anything away from Brett Bielema and that Illinois team because they won the game fair and square, but it wasn't so much about what they did, but what Nebraska did to itself. So I think this is a decent team they're playing, and I think the letdown factor could happen, and they may win this game close, but I wouldn't be shocked if UTSA wins it outright.
I like that. I don't know if I would go that far, but I like that pick. All right, now we're on to the Penn State and Wisconsin game. We are on different sides of this. You can read Open Jim and see Jim's full prediction, and then you can wait on madison.com for who has the edge later this week, and you can see my full prediction. But I am going to lay the 5.5 with Wisconsin. I think that average Camp Randall, home field advantage should be about 3.5, 4 points. And then I just think that there's enough firepower on this offense. And I'm a believer in Maluzzi. I know I totally agree with your points that we haven't seen anything from him yet in a Wisconsin uniform, but I just think the things we've seen from him at Clemson in the past and in training camp, I believe in him and this offense. And personally, I just think this defense is going to be nasty all year. I really like how this defense has played from the start of camp. And I think it's going to be putting on the field very quickly against Penn State. So I'm going to lay the 5.5. Jim's going to take the 5.5 with the Nittany Lions. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mentioned this in the mailbag this week too, and I'm sure you remember this, but I leaned over to you pretty early in camp and said, when the offense was struggling, obviously the defense looked looked great. I said, this team's going to have to win a lot of 17-13 games this year or something like that. And that's what I'm going with in this opener. I'm sticking with that. I think it's going to be a 17-13 type-ish game. I think Wisconsin wins it. I think it's close throughout. I don't think it's going to be pretty at times. I think there's going to be some typical opening game stuff that makes it a little bit ugly and ragged. But I do think the crowd and the defense carries this team through and it wins. Really needs to avoid the backbreaking mistakes, the turnovers, the shooting yourself in the foot with penalties, especially when you're in scoring position, special teams gaffes, stuff like that. But I think they're going to win a close game, but not cover.
That's all fair. One other thing that I would like to say or get on the boards eventually here in Las Vegas or the internet is how many personal fouls and or just skirmishes does Jack Nelson cause against an opponent? Now, maybe it takes him to the third quarter to realize hey, no, he's just going to keep doing this all day. But I'm interested to see what this finally looks like against an opponent. I was telling some of our other colleagues in the media the other day that there will be a pile that Jack Nelson pushes somebody over and hopes not to get caught.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this, but we've seen he kind of just pushes things right to the edge. And you get the feeling that his teammates on Wisconsin's defense don't love it, but understand it and respect that he's on their team and they, are willing to look the other way. That's not going to be the same with opposing defenses, guys that he doesn't have to play on the same team with. So I'm anxious to watch him. I'm anxious to watch Tippmann. I really think that could be a really good duo going forward. So it's there aren't a lot of new starters on this team, but Nelson's one of them and Tippmann's another one. And so this is a big game for those guys. I mean, Jack Nelson's never played in front of a big crowd. So I'm curious to see how some of those guys do. And with that much energy, there's going to be a ton of energy. Can you use it positively? That's the key.
Jim out here just hating on Stoughton, saying that they don't get crowds off it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, 80,000 is different. It's just a different world. And I just think these guys are going to be so amped up after not playing in front of crowds that I'm interested to see how the first quarter goes.
I'm with you. All right. Make sure you guys are on madison.com. We have a special going on right now. You can get 6 months of online access for $1. That is 6 months. That gets you through the entire football season and most of basketball for $1. And more than likely, there's going to be another special around that time anyway. So you can continue getting that coverage for $1. Jim, did I mention it's $1 for 6 months? Gets you through the entire football season, throughout a bowl game, wherever they end up going here in Badgerland. $1 for 6 months. I'm going to say it one more time. $1 for 6 months, people. Get on madison.com. Get signed up if you are already.
How much was it?
$1 for 6 months. I'm glad perfect. All right. If you guys have been here listening, you can tell that we are excited for this season. We have a ton of new things that are going to be coming your way from games, make sure you're on madison.com checking all of it out. A little bit different way we're going to cover games this year. I'm excited to see how it works, and it's a little nerve-wracking to do things differently, just professionally, but I'm excited to see where we go. Jim columnizing after games now, after years of writing features and sidebars and all that stuff. We got a lot of new people that are going to be at games, so it's going to be fun. Make sure you're along for the ride. $1 for 6 months. That's $1 for 6 months. All right, for Jim Polzin, I'm Colten Bartholomew. Thank you guys very much for listening.